Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, which is all about how to spot the latest trends of fraudulent tenant applications and stay ahead of the criminals to keep your landlord safe and your business reputation intact. Wow, quite a powerful topic we're talking about today. And I'm joined by two equally powerful ladies with me this afternoon. We've got the one and only Sally Lawson, my obviously co-director and the founder of Agent Rainmaker, and Joe Dickens, who is here representing the Barban Group, who is Let Alliance, HomeLet and Rent for Sure, who are one of the leading referencing and rental guarantee providers in the industry. So two better people to talk about this topic. Good afternoon, ladies. How are you?
We're good, thank you.
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Kate. Thank you very much for having me.
You are welcome.
It's a topic
Absolutely.
I'm very, very passionate about this.
Well, we're very interested to hear about it. I think anything that comes into play about having helping agents stay safe is very important. And I think when you got in touch with me about this, it's really interesting because I'm sure you'll talk about this today a bit more, but there's been a real rise in fraudulent and criminal tenant activities. And I think it's something really important that agents have their eyes open so that they can keep themselves safe.
Massively so, Kate. I mean, I remember back in the day, 12, 15 years ago, where you'd essentially do your referencing in-house in your own agency, and you'd write to the employer and say, can you just let me know that they work there and what the salary is? And you'd give the landlord a quick ring on a mobile phone and say, yeah, did they pay the rent on time? And you'd have a quick look at whether they've got any CCJs. And let's be honest, that was pretty much it. And like the way things have evolved over the years is just incredible, and the experience that the team members need to have now, and the technology that you've got to bring in. And it's very much these days a mixture of like people, tech and data. That those are the three key elements now in doing a reference. And I think especially during COVID, when it was more difficult for agents to be out and about meeting people and things like that, we've seen a huge spike. And there's some not so clever fraudsters out there, let's be honest, and there's some very, very clever ones out there. And it's about, I think, us as a provider being able to work with agent groups and agent networks to make sure we stop these people getting into properties.
Sally, you talk about with Agent Rainmaker a lot about the difference between lettings now and lettings sort of 20 years ago.
30.
Sorry, 30. I was being polite. I was being PC there.
No.
What Joe talks about, the fact that in-house referencing was really just what was happening then, and how dramatically different we find ourselves now.
Yeah, well, I was just creating a list when we talked about doing this webinar of the different types of frauds that have occurred over the years. And if you go back 30 years or 20 odd years ago, let's say, the worst thing that could happen is you'd end up with a property that would be turned into a brothel. We've had a few of those over the years. And more recently, in the last sort of 10 to 20 years, cannabis farms. But I think one of the biggest challenges that's come more recently is subletting. So I think one of the big things at the moment that a lot of people are talking about is, and this sort of appeared around 10 years ago, is a lot of people are renting properties in order to sublet them either as HMOs. There has been incidences of unscrupulous companies and people having, they call it slaves, low paid workers, masses of people hot bedding in properties, cause massive fines because they're running illegal HMOs at that point. And more recently as well, people subletting in order to turn them into Airbnbs. So I think Joe's got a lot of value here to add, because I think over the decades, you could almost split the decades by the type of fraud. And I think we've all got to be a little bit more savvier now. And more recently, of course, it's very easy to get fake documents, passports, right to rent documents, anything. You can even get a COVID pass if you want to go to a country and you're not vaccinated. Yeah. And you can get anything on the internet now. So we really have got to have eyes in the backs of our head.
I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right, Sally. You can go on a website this afternoon and you can literally buy yourself a document pack, and that will have, the ID that you need, it'll have the documents that you need. And, you know, we spend a huge amount of time training our people to be able to, you know, they're eyeballing these documents, but they're also using, you know, document scanners for cross-checking. They're using identity document scanners in certain cases. So we have cases where we'll get, let's say, a right to rent document, and we'll actually be able to validate that that's fraudulent right at the start of the application and knock those out. Subletting is massive. And what's incredible is, as we've grown within the brands, the power of having 3 different brands and the volume of data that we have going through. I mean, we'll probably process just shy of 1 million references this year. And when you think about how many applicants are going through, and I can tell you it's a weekly occurrence that we'll have somebody, an individual, who will try and get through a reference with an agent in central London. We will stop them. They'll then try it with another agent in central London, and we'll stop them again through a duplicate tenant task. They'll then try it again with another agent, and they'll go through with the Rent4Sure brand, and we'll stop it again because we can see that they're a duplicate throughout the group. And excuse me, it's incredible how cheeky these people will be. You know, we run duplicate tenant tasks, so we're looking at people based on things like phone number matches, email matches. We get people who attempt to go through the platform once, then attempt to go through again with a completely different name. And they've got ID to support it. And that's where the document checks will knock them out. You know, we're members of the fraud database. We're members of CIFAS, which gives us access to this wealth of information. You know, we can report back to CIFAS when we do catch fraudulent applicants. So that's hugely valuable. You know, our team are doing things like URL checks on email domains. We run a suspicious applicants log. So if you've got somebody who, again, you do find out they are a fraudster, we can actually log the employer that they say that they work with. We can log the landlord that they say that they're renting from, and we can add that to suspicious apps, which means that in the future, if another application goes through with similar details, we can flag that via a cross-check on suspicious applicants. So this is what I mean about like data, tech, and people all working together.
All
Sorry, Kate.
together.
Like Scotland Yard or something, isn't it? Can I ask, Jo, there must have been sort of things that have happened over the course of I don't know how recent, to obviously take it from where you're sort of talking about sort of 30, 40 years ago, where, it's all, yep, here you are, and this is you, and have a nice time in your house kind of thing, to where now, obviously, I would say the majority of agents that we certainly work with are using a professional referencing company to do this. But what changed, or what sort of chain of events happened to sort of mean that we are now having to take these measures? Because it's quite an extreme, and I can understand why, but there must have been, I mean, I bet you've got some great case studies or some scare stories of things that have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one for us, Kate, is because we're such a massive provider of rent guarantee. So we're a massive provider of rent guarantee. We're a massive provider of legal services. So we will, a huge amount of our learnings have come from going through the rent guarantee claims process. So when a claim comes in, we're all over those references, we're auditing them. For everybody, hindsight is a wonderful thing. As people have got cleverer, we've been able to increase our learnings. So, all of the claims database that we hold, that's 25 years plus of rent guarantee claims data that we're holding. So we've got all those people's details, who still owe us money, let's face it. And actually we have had success as well in catching people and recovering money from them when they've gone back through the referencing process again, because they think, oh, I've not paid my rent for 6 months, goodbye, I've been evicted, I've disappeared off, I've sorted myself back out again. And guess what, 2-3 years later we find them again, either through tracing or through them going back through the platform again, and we're able to intercept them. So I would say claims has been our biggest learning. And of course, we're notified as well by our agent partners a lot of the time if something does does go wrong. So whilst we always encourage people to protect themselves with rent guarantee, there'll inevitably be people who won't. And in those situations, if something does go wrong, there's normally a phone call to us to say, can you audit this reference? Can you look at what's happened? You know, and then we'll start deep dive into it. And that's where things like suspicious apps logs have grown from. That's where things like the URL checkers have grown from. That's where the duplicate tenant checks have grown from. And then since the merging of the three brands, that's where we've got the added bonus of the data that we have across the three brands on those applicants. So, for example, if Let Alliance is referencing somebody who's been in a rent guarantee claim with HomeLet before, we can intercept that. And likewise, the huge network of letting agent partners that we've got, you know, a number of which we've worked with for a number of years. So if one of these individuals goes to one particular business in London and then tries to rent another property in Manchester, we're seeing that because we can see that duplication. So then we can be having a conversation with the agent as well, because typically, you know, like Sally said, subletting, it's massive. You will see these applicants going through the referencing platform multiple times in multiple different areas. And without these checks, you know, look, guys, they could be taking properties in every county and using them for subletting or for illegal purposes.
We had a great one a few years ago, actually reminds me of we had a lady apply for a property. It's a big property, and she said that she was going to be putting some of her staff in it. She ran a bed and breakfast, and she's going to be putting her staff in this property. I thought, doesn't sound right. Anyway, did some Googling and found a video on YouTube of this woman coaching people on how to get around the letting agent to actually get them to let you have a property so that you could sublet them as a HMO on a company let agreement. It was absolutely brilliant. So yeah, absolutely true. But I just want to pick up on something that you said there, actually, Joe, because we've been with you guys, HomeLet, I don't know if you know this, but for over like 20 odd years. And in fact, I can remember when you practically rebuilt one of my houses after somebody drove into it in the late at night. So I remember getting a very strange phone call at, I think it was about 2:00 in the morning from our out of calls answering, saying, someone's drove into your house, but don't worry, we've sorted it.
I'm glad we rebuilt it.
It was one of those bizarre moments in life, you know, but you guys put it all back together again, which was absolutely awesome. But one of the things I want to pick up on there is you talked about rental guarantee and legal protection. And do you know what? I think there's definitely an apathy in a lot of letting agents in selling this, because their belief is that the landlords won't pay for it, that the landlords won't value it. But actually right now there's a huge appetite for it from landlords, because we've just been through COVID. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that live on a webinar, but anyway, we've just been through this horrible time where we're seeing people staring down the barrel of not getting any rents for 9 to 12 months if they fall into arrears, and possibly longer. Some awful situations. And what we found, because we've just literally rolled out an opt-out rental guarantee scheme to all of our landlords, is something around an 80% take-up, absolute massive take-up on rental guarantee. Well, of course, from a landlord's perspective, a letting agent, you are protecting your landlords by doing that, getting your rental guarantee and legal protection, but you're also protecting your own revenue as well. So I just think if perhaps anybody watching here that perhaps has not looked at this more recently and thought, oh no, landlords won't pay for it, I think absolutely look at it again. There's a massive, we're finding a massive want for it, a need for it in the market with very little, you know, it's not hard to upsell. It's a single letter and an opt-out process. So I think it's really worth revisiting that again, because being part of this for like the last 30 years, rental guarantees gone like this, it was popular and all this other stuff and whatever. And right now I think it's having a bit of a heyday. So certainly a chance to capitalise on that.
I think as well, Sally, over the years, there's been so many different iterations of it, and, you know, what people perceive as being so many loopholes and things. You know, now it's really simple. It protects the rent, but also don't lose sight of the legal cover that it gives. So, you know, we talk about tenancy breaches and, you know, a breach giving grounds for possession, things like subletting, things like using the property for illegal purposes. These are people that can take a long time to get out. These are people who know the system, and that legal cover is there to cover you in the event of a tenancy breach. Antisocial behaviour, you know, this is another one that we're seeing more and more of. So, you know, it is an important product to have, and I kind of think it's almost a bit of a no-brainer for landlords, because it's not really an astronomical cost. I mean, what, 20 odd quid a month to protect, and you know, the average rent now is like £1,086 a month. I mean, seriously, you know, and you kind of think, why wouldn't you, you know? And I think it's for some landlords as well, you know, even landlords who are like, no, I'm not worried about the rent. It's almost a matter of principle, because if that tenant does default, it's going to cost you at least 1,500 quid to get them to court, right? And then you're hoping that you get a possession order. But then what happens afterwards? What happens when they've gone? Because we all know that a lot of these tenants hightail it off into the sunset, and there's not really any way of catching them. You know, they might get some adverse credit against them if the judgment's enforced. With a proper rent guarantee provider, if we get a judgment, we don't let that go. So we will keep going after them. They're, like I say, they're on the suspicious apps logs. They're on they're on the default tenant database. And add to that, we will put them into a recoveries process. So every 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, we'll reattempt tracing on them. You know, we've got to the point before now where, you know, we've had to go and get things like attachment of earnings. You know, we've had charges put against properties and things like that, because these people do disappear, they do re-establish themselves, but they could have potentially left the landlord with thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds worth of rent arrears, an absolute headache, you know, huge amounts of inconvenience, because they just decided they didn't want to pay the rent.
It's weird, because in other industries, you know, if you were to rack up credit and then not pay and default, you know, this would happen. And it comes back to ROPA and the regulation of this industry and whatever that may look like, and we don't know yet. But, you know, having worked abroad in other industry, in other countries in this industry, this is standard. So, you know, it's protected, and that, you know, if this happens, it's guaranteed, and if there isn't, there's a formal legal process that people go through and that kind of thing. And I think, you know, yes, we're waiting for the regulation and whatever that might look like, but in the meantime, we can work as agents, and we can work by educating our landlords that if this was a standard across the board, tenants like that wouldn't be able to make this, you know, and we're talking about a very small percentage here, because the majority of tenants are good, and we you know, appreciate that, and they're paying and things like that, but it's the few that ruin it for the rest, right?
Of course it is.
You know, and this wouldn't be continuing, because they would know that if you do that, this is the course of action that happens as standard, and we'd be able to sort of get rid of this sort of fraudulent behavior within our industry, which does cost agents and landlords thousands and thousands of pounds.
I want to bring up something else as well, that from an agent's perspective, we see that possibly might bypass the referencing agencies, is that sometimes you get, and this was actually talked about in our Agent Rainmaker group this morning, actually, how sometimes you get people come in with sob stories and they need to get in fast because of insert excuse. They can't get their passport because of insert excuse, whatever the case may be. And you do get a lot of situations, not a lot of situations, you will come across situations where people try to bypass the referencing process. And it can be very tempting when you've got a landlord saying, oh, I like them, I trust them, just let them in. And when, you know, one of your negs is thinking it's the 30th deal or the 10th deal or whatever it is, it's going to mean their bonus. And it all gets a bit like, in my experience over the years, those are the ones that are going to be the problems. It's the ones that you bend over backwards for in the early days. And some of the things that we've spotted over the years is things like you just said right at the beginning here, this is my boss's phone number, and it's a mobile number. And you ring the mobile number, and that's the boss. But of course, it's not the boss; it's a friend, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is.
And letterheads, you know, references on letterheads. I've prepared the letterhead. Here it is. Here's my reference. But of course, anybody who works for a company can get hold of a letterhead and write a reference. And it's just being aware of not really accepting these quick bypass options. Always stand true to your process every single time, because these people will, you know, if they're criminals, then they're going to be good liars, and they're going to be equipped at not telling the truth, and they will get around it. And another thing I've found really useful as well is Google. Very, very useful. There was an interesting case talked about this morning in the Agent Rainmaker group again. It wasn't actually about tenants. It was actually a member of staff defraud, I believe. But this woman was Googled, and they found a string of fraud, went to jail, all sorts of cases as well. So I think it's always really worth just Googling people as well to see if there's anything. I actually had one. Actually, can I just share this case? I did have one. We're going back about 10 years. I can remember we had this lady came in and she wanted to pay us 12 months cash in advance. And we were like, 12 months cash? It was at the beginning of all the money laundering. I was like, well, you know, we shouldn't take 12 months, but what's this all about? And she was really in a rush and she had to move now. Whenever. Anyway, we Googled her and she'd basically stolen £56,000 from her employer and was in the Express and Star front page the week before. So we're like, oh, no, thank you. And we reported her as well. God. So you've got to be really careful about these rush jobs, I think.
But this is what's really important, I think, about working together, you know, and working in partnership. We can do what we do with the data, the tech. You know, we can see someone's full credit file rather than just the, you know, what we call the thin file or the publicly available information on CCJs. You know, we really promote the use of open banking. So, you know, open banking is giving us actual factual transactional data from people's accounts. But we've got to work together on it. Like you say, Sally, Googling people, you know, doing your own ID checks, making sure you can meet them, you know, people who are in a rush, people who've got a sob story, people who are who just will not meet you face to face, people who have a representative who's, you know, who does everything for them, makes you really nervous. And guess what? Rent in advance, classic. 6 months, 12 months rent in advance. We've seen so much of that, you know, where I've been asked to do a deep dive on a reference, and guess what? You've had a branch that said it's fine, we don't want you to do anything else. We're taking 12 months rent in advance instead. And we've said, well, you know, that's your decision to make with your landlord. I don't think a lot of these landlords recognize the risk in doing that.
No.
Because 6 months or 12 months later, either the person's moved in and then they never pay another penny in rent, or they've taken possession of the property and done something like sublet it, or, you know, put somebody else in there that shouldn't be in there.
It comes down to education with most of what we talk about, really, and this is education to the landlords about the necessity of this. And I think it starts with, you know, you've got to educate the agents to the risks that are out there. And it's always one of those things that until something bad happens, you don't sort of, you know, tend to open your eyes to it. A bit of a controversial one for you, Joe, but a lot of some agents that conversations I've been having recently over the few months, and obviously with the pandemic set in, you've seen the rise in rental guarantee. Obviously that was something that hindsight would have been helpful for people, and as you say, Sally, this is now kind of a hot commodity, and people are doing that. But there are some agents out there who still have rental portfolios with in-house reference tenants, and that being able to do, you know, which I know you guys do, which is obviously to take over an existing portfolio and obviously offer a rental guarantee throughout. They will then need to be re-referenced, because in order for you guys to guarantee, then obviously they need to be referenced by a professional. Now, it's quite funny. I found myself in an argument the other day with an agent about this, because they didn't want to have to do that because it would mean re-referencing existing tenants. And I can't help thinking that if you're worried about that, you know, are we doing what we should be doing for our landlords? Because, you know, there's existing tenancies that you, as you quite rightly say, until you look under the hood and you see what's going on, surely we need to be sort of putting people into the best position they possibly can moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to question it if you're still doing in-house referencing at this point in time. The people out there they are so clever. The things that they can do, like you say, letterheads, the stuff so easily available. But what I would say is, with an existing tenant, parking the fact that the referencing was done in-house originally, if that's the way it was, you do fortunately have probably 6 months, 12 months plus of experience with this individual. So, you know, we do have underwriting criteria that we have to adhere to, but provided there is a positive history within that property for a set period of time that's acceptable to us, we can look to still provide a rent protection cover, which means that landlords can still be protected and agents can still be protected. But we might not necessarily have done the referencing. But what we would say is it needs to be done by an approved third party going forward.
Useful to know.
We've actually got a question from Adil. He says, sometimes applicants do not want to opt into open banking. Is that a problem, or is that a suspicious problem?
I wouldn't say at this stage it's a suspicious problem. I would say if someone's going to do something fraudulent, they're absolutely not going to use open banking, unless they've perhaps got a gun to my head and they're trying to get me to do it for them and pretending to be me. I think open banking is still a relatively new piece of technology. So there will be an element of nervousness about it, people feeling that we access their bank account. We don't at all. We literally have access to the data that we need to see for our own purposes for a set period of time in almost like a read-only format, and then we can categorize it how we need to. There are still some banks that aren't part of open banking, but I would say that it is very, very easy if the individual doesn't want to use open banking for them to do things like download copies of bank statements. And if we ever have any nervousness about those bank statements, we can actually do our own bank checks directly with the bank just to check that the transactions on there are legitimate. So I wouldn't say it poses a massive risk immediately, but it's something to bear in mind. And I would say wherever possible, if you can encourage the use of it, I would say that's where you're going to help minimize fraud risk on your agency as well. The other thing that we put a red flag on is what we call a no score. So if an individual who has gone through our referencing process and we've not located a credit file for them, so they've been in the UK for sort of 12 months plus, we can't locate a credit file for them. These days that's odd. People are a lot more aware of their credit. People are on Credit Karma, they're on Totally Money, they're on Experian, you know, they're looking at their credit all the time. So that for us would trigger it to go into a higher risk work pool as well, where we've got a dedicated team that looks at those applications.
Joe, Mal has mentioned in the chat here that he believes the landlords are aware of the risks, but that the law he finds is so pro-tenant that there's not much that can be done. How can these services you're talking about, what you guys are providing, sort of almost flip the coin on that?
Well, we pay out a lot of money in claims, and I don't think landlords have any idea of the amount of money that gets paid out in rent guarantee claims every year. I don't think a lot of landlords are aware of the legislation that they have to adhere to be able to potentially get a tenant out in the future. So, you know, all the legislation that you as agents have to adhere to, that you do on behalf of landlords, you know, that makes sure they don't have a rent guarantee claim declined. That makes sure it's, you know, it's smooth sailing as far as it can be when a case gets to court. You know, the last thing you want is to get to court and find out, oh, guess what? You know, we used the wrong calculator and we've taken a penny's worth of deposit too much. And the judge might just say, well, actually, you're in breach of the legislation, so I'm not going to give you possession. You know, I don't think landlords are aware to that level, and I think it's really important that as agents and as agent partners that we're educating landlords in that way. And I think, awful as it sounds, if I'm speaking to a private landlord, I think there is almost an element of fear factor about it, because they don't see, you know, they don't see the houses that we see that are utterly trashed when people leave. They don't see the, you know, the buildings insurance claims that we get for malicious damage when a property's been turned into a cannabis farm. You know, it's all those things that they don't see. And, you know, you would think that enough of them would watch, you know, all these programs like Rogue Tenant, Slum Landlord, but they just seem to think it's a TV program and it's not real life.
It's interesting because I've been running landlord seminars since 1997, which is rather a long time. And one of the things I always like to do is to ask them, you know, I'm going to list the loads of pieces of legislation and there's a bottle of champagne here for the people that can remember them the most. And the most I've ever got landlords in a room to name and to write down is 7. And that's crazy when there's 170 pieces of legislation. And one of the big reasons, and I'm sure, you know, those of people that are at the back end of this trying to solve these problems out will agree, is that a lot of the times the reason evictions fail is due to lack of due process. It's lack of forms, lack of completions, the Deregulation Act, something's not served as it should be, gas cert wasn't done, something or other. That will quite often prevent eviction. I mean, in 32 years, we've never lost an eviction. And that's just really down to just making sure everything is done as it should be at the right time. But of course, you know, it isn't a perfect world. But I think a lot of landlords perhaps don't follow it quite as strictly as they should and fall themselves foul. That's our job as agents, really, to make sure things are done as they should be. I've got a question for you, actually, Jo, because I know this is something that's come up a few times with some of our members, is that it's really complicated to check the ID of people from foreign countries because, some passports look very odd and, look very different to others. What would you give as a tip really for an agent? Is there somewhere they can go or something they can do to make this easier, to learn how to check the ID? What is a valid passport? What isn't a valid passport? Is there somewhere they can go?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of platforms that they can go to, Sally. With the introduction of, what's coming in now, like the IDVT technology, this is becoming more and more of a big thing. People want to be able to take a copy of an ID, be able to get the individual to take a selfie, move their head round and things so that they can prove that they are living, and then it will give them a response back. There are so many companies out there now that are absolutely specializing in it. Firms like Fido, firms like Yoti, where they get these names from, I've got no idea. There's firms like Trust ID that will do document checks, and these are all things that we're always working on evolving the referencing process. These are all things that we're either utilizing or looking to build into our process. But I would say if agencies are looking for something, there's a number of firms out there that you can find really easily by Googling, or if anyone wants to drop me a message, I can share some information on some of the partners that we've worked with.
For me, with my sales hat on, and I know that speaking to agents and coaching agents, what they want is more customers. They want more landlords. They want more business. That's what they want to do. This would be something that I would be using as a real selling point for my services. Using this information, using case studies, using that, and saying that what we do here is we use Let Alliance or Home Let or Rent for Sure or whatever you do because of all these reasons, because of the X amount of money that's paid out in compensations, because of this technology out there, and did you know, and all this. I had to do one the other day for my bank, and I feel like such a wally, don't you, doing that sort of thing? But using this as a massive sales closing technique, because we are trying to keep them safe, and this is what we're doing. And if you can be a cut above the rest or use that to close business, then surely it's going to be worth the money that even without the claims and the further down the line.
And look, we've got case studies that we can share. They're obviously completely anonymized, but we have got case studies that we can share that that can be used to show images of properties when people have left, and the absolute mess that they've left it in, and the amount of rent arrears and the timeline that it's taken to get people out. Claims that get adjourned, then you've got to go back to court again. And almost like that life cycle of tenant moves in, tenant defaults on the rent, or there's a breach, and how long it takes to actually go full circle, get them out, and then ultimately, hopefully, get a new tenant in. Because look, let's face it, there's so many landlords at the moment looking to exit the market, and if you have a bad experience with a tenant, you're going to be, as a landlord, more nervous. So if you as an agent can be protecting that landlord and encouraging them to stay within the sector, then it's another landlord retained. It's another one that stays as part of your managed portfolio.
I love Mary's comment, Kate.
Yes, I was just about to say, I've got to drop this in before we finish, because a lot of people are saying that social media and Googling and looking people up is something that they have as part of their systems and their processes and their checklists. And Mary in Dublin, went through a potential tenant's Facebook, and there he was in all his glory with a grenade and a Klaskinov rifle. So, not
scary
imagine.
Stuff.
Very scary. Absolutely. Well, Jo, thank you so much for sharing this with us today. I know that, this is a topic that we could talk about and you're obviously very passionate about, and that, that you guys genuinely believe in looking after this industry and its agents and tenants and landlords alike. So thank you so much for sharing. As you say, I know you've only scratched the surface, and if this is something you guys want to talk to them more about, please get in touch. I will drop in a contact detail in here. I've also dropped in, guys, we talked about the Agent Rainmaker group, which is a great community that we've got. If you're not already part of it, 5,500 agents just like you in a very, very active community where we're always sharing stuff like this and aiming to obviously drive the standards up and keep each other safe as well. So any last words from you ladies before we close out?
what's the best way for people to contact you, Joe, if they want to reach you?
I've just dropped a link in there for her. So
Yeah,
get in touch.
link on the website, Chester number 564968. Give us a call.
Awesome. Lovely. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you very much for having me. Nice to see you both.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there.